Hi, I'm Jennifer Pan, and I'm a staff writer at the New Republic. I'm very happy to be here with Doc NYC moderating a Q&A on the big scary S word with director Yael Bridge and Stephanie Price, who is a public school educator and one of the central people in the film. So welcome, Yael and Steph. Thanks for being here.
Hi, happy to be here.
Hey, how's it going?
To start off, hi. So to start off with just a broad question to you, Yael, I think the first question I had was sort of about the structure and the content of the film. Obviously, you weave together a couple different streams. So there's a little bit of history about, socialism in the US. You talk and have interviews with prominent socialists like Cornel West and other academics and scholars. And then, of course, you follow the campaign of Lee Carter and then Steph's story with the Oklahoma teacher strike. And I think when I was watching, something that I kind of felt at times was that the specter sort of haunting the film was the Bernie Sanders campaign, or rather the two Bernie Sanders campaigns from 2016 and 2020.
Yeah.
And obviously Bernie makes an appearance in the film at the Lee Carter campaign. And of course, he sort of pops in talking in clips here and there, but he's not a central figure. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the choice to sort of foreground like Lee Carter's campaign, and then of course the Oklahoma teacher strike, and even like the Bank of North Dakota, rather than focusing on the presidential race.
Yeah, I think mostly I wanted to make this film relevant. And when I started filming, it was in between Bernie's campaigns and we didn't know whether he was going to be running again. I mean, I had a hunch that he was, but I didn't want this film to be tied to a candidate. And I also don't want to like create these idols and put someone on a pedestal and say, oh, this is what this movement is about. And even though I think he's been really central in this resurgence, it's so much larger than him, right? The book, bigger than Bernie, like that is what this film is trying to sort of show, and that it's been here, before him and will continue. And so you're right, his absence is noticeable, but that I think is just the virtue of the time that we were filming, and didn't want it tied one way or the other. Yeah.
Right. And then, kind of continuing off the theme of bigger than Bernie, Steph, going over to you. When we first meet you in the film, you're obviously part of the Oklahoma teacher strike. You're a public school educator and you're in this movement. And then by the end of the film, you are at the big Socialism 2018 conference. You get a standing ovation from the crowd. And when I was watching kind of this journey, I was thinking about how, the teacher strike was obviously a workers' movement, but it's probably safe to say that not every teacher who was part of that strike identified as a socialist. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, how your own politics or how your own thinking changed throughout the course of the strike and in kind of the journey to Socialism 2018. And then a secondary question is, what do you think are some of the pros and cons of using a term like socialist or socialism?
So I would say that the Oklahoma teacher strike for me was radicalizing. I mean, yes, obviously Oklahoma is a very conservative place. There are a lot of educators who are participating in the strike, like you said, who are not politically progressive, are not leftist, or, the reason that we came together was for our students, was for our positions as educators, for respect, for dignity, all of that, which I think is something that a lot of people could get behind regardless of politics, obviously. But, for me, it really was radicalizing, like being somebody who already was more left-leaning and then going into that experience, realizing more about what happens when people come together, what power unions could have, what power workers can have when they say, we're not going to take this, and stand up and work together. So I think in general, it was certainly an experience that pushed me further to the left than I already was. So,
And how did you find your way to Socialism 2018?
Yeah, that was through some connections that I had made in the process of the strike. There were actually people in the ISO, the former International Socialist Organization, who were working with solidarity efforts. So helping to raise money to bring in pizza and feed us, talking to educators and just trying to help, with like just giving us support, talking to us about organizing. A couple people were there on the ground, just it's solidarity,
Right.
and solidarity with our struggle. So I was invited by one of those people who I formed a friendship with during that time to speak on a panel of educators at the Socialism Conference. And then if you could remind me of that second question that you asked, I had it in my head.
Yeah. So as someone who, has obviously been kind of in contact with self-identified socialists, but also, as you say, coming from a state that's pretty red, what do you think are the pros and cons of calling things socialist or socialism?
All right. So, the title of the film, right? Like, people hear it and they're just like, it just causes this reaction and they don't know what to think. And oh my gosh, it's the scary word. So I think that's a con. Like, some people have an immediate negative reaction to that word. And I'm not quite sure why. But I think the pro is opening up a conversation about what socialism is actually. Like, it's not a scary secret thing. It is actually something that a lot of people could probably get on board with if they knew more about what it was, beyond that, like, tiny negative framework that happens because of the political systems and I say tiny as in like having a small understanding of it.
Right. I think that's something that I myself really enjoyed about the film, that, scary S word makes it really clear that racism is not kind of this foreign import, but as Cornel West says in the film, it's as American as apple pie. And I think that the ways in which that kind of plays out in the film is really interesting. So Yael, to go back to you, was there anything throughout the course of the film that surprised you, or what did you find most surprising during the, however many months you spent putting the film together, thinking about it, interviewing people, and filming?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of it was surprising. It wasn't a history that I was super familiar with, and I definitely didn't set out to make such a historical film, but sort of that was what I gravitated towards as I learned more and more of the history, and was just, whoa, people need to know this and this is wild. So sort of, I think all of the historical beats in the film, including the Bank of North Dakota, and that this was set up over 100 years ago, all that stuff was pretty new and thrilling to me, to learn that is our history as Americans, that it's been here for quite some time.
So was it the historical aspect that first kind of piqued interest in making a film about socialism?
No, it was actually, it was the last election and just seeing how successful Bernie Sanders was. And I had been working on another film at that point, and that had me traveling around the country following that election cycle, and was just really sort of blown away by the Bernie Trump phenomenon, and reading about it, but then actually going out and being in these Midwest states and being like, oh, there are actually a lot of people that I would not think would vote for socialists that are like, no, Bernie's making a ton of sense, and saying, okay, there's something going on here. And what does that word mean? Because these people wouldn't necessarily call themselves a socialist at all, but we're really into his politics. And so that was the starting off point for me of like, let me dig in more, let me read more, let me see, what that would look like.
And Steph, over to you, a kind of similar question. What surprised you when you were in the teacher strike and then in the organizing work that you've done since then?
That's something I really have to think about. I don't know if I was necessarily, one thing that did surprise me in the walkout was that some of our representatives and legislators at the state capitol of Oklahoma had no idea what was going on. And I guess I just went in assuming that because they were our elected officials, they would know. Like they would know what the bills were, or they would know what some of the issues were. And some of them really didn't seem to have an understanding. And, you know, maybe some people didn't find that surprising, but I did. So that certainly, in terms of organizing work, I don't know that all of it was new to me. Like it is a new thing that I learned during this process. It was something that all of it was just an exploration and an adventure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think, you know, since we've been kind of talking a little bit about like what you guys are doing now and like what, you know, you've done in the past, I want to look to the future a little bit. Obviously, I have to bring up the fact that we are in a kind of unprecedented moment. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a recession. We're seeing mass unemployment. And things are just extremely politically uncertain right now. So I'm wondering if you can both sort of talk about what kinds of possibilities you see emerging over the next year or so, in terms of workplace organizing or movements for economic justice, and whether, you know, on the subject of the big scary S word, you think that socialism will continue to lose its stigma or kind of take on a new meaning. So Steph, maybe if you want to offer some thoughts, and then Yael can close out.
Yeah, sure. I do think that continuing to have these conversations about socialism, you know, the movie, that people will get to see that people who identify as socialists are like normal, everyday people who have real jobs and like hearts and families and you know, and it's like we're just people who believe that there is something that could be better about that there is something that could be better than what happens now. And so in that aspect, I am hopeful about the future because I really think that we have an opportunity to help give people some knowledge and a broader understanding of why capitalism is absolutely creating and continuing to perpetuate some of those systems of oppression in our nation.
Right, like it's so completely clear, especially right now, right?
Yeah, it's like there's so much going on in my head, but I just feel like if I don't sit here and say that capitalism is a system that has perpetuated racism and oppression for so long, that there absolutely has to be something better than that, and it is the time to change that. We have to. We have to. And I think socialism can help people to learn more about that and to be able to do that. It can change the world we live in now.
And Yael, same question to you. Thoughts on the possibilities emerging?
Yeah. Stephanie, that was just so well said. I don't like following you when you talk. I think I think I definitely am hopeful, knowing that we don't know, you know, the results of the elections. But when we look to younger generations, right, they were wildly supportive of these more progressive policies, and they don't carry this stigma. Like Lee said, you know, I don't remember the Berlin Wall falling. That those attachments don't mean anything to me. And so I think we will be moving into a new era, and we can look at it. You saw a recent history of where people were on gay marriage, you know, and how quickly that sort of turnaround happened. I'm optimistic that that is sort of a landscape that we're going, and not necessarily with language and using certain words to describe our policies, but actually just looking at, you know, like Stephanie said, like expecting better and saying like, you know what, we can do better. You know, maybe I'm not going to call myself a socialist, but I think we should have universal health care. Like that's wildly popular, bipartisan. So, you know, it wasn't like that 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. So I think it's very hard to find hope and optimism these days because it is so incredibly hard. Just the day-to-day is just grueling. But it will, I'm sure it will be better very soon. And there are people like Stephanie that are out there actively trying to make sure that happens. There's enough of those people, and I've met those people, that makes me ready to see what happens.
Great, thank you. So on that note, I think we have to wrap up the conversation, but thank you again to Yael and Steph for being part of this discussion with Doc NYC.
Thank you.